Hello, I am Carolyn Kassan. I am the Associate Dean and Clinical Professor at the New York University Center for Global Affairs. I'm also the founding director of the Energy, Climate Justice, and Sustainability Lab. And I am positively so excited and delighted to be co-hosting season 3 of the Clean Energy Revolution, and to really just, I'm here in New York in the United States, and my co-host is in Scotland. So Laura, over to you.
Hello from across the pond. That's right, I'm joining you as co-host for this season 3. So excited. I'm Laura Young, also known as Less Waste Laura, and I'm a climate campaigner and environmental scientist, as has been said, based here in the UK, and I cannot wait to bring you the next chapter of this podcast.
So we're just a couple of weeks into 2024. It's a brand new year. It's shaping up to be a big one, not just in energy, but in economics, climate, environment, global politics. As we said earlier, I'm here in the United States. Laura's in Scotland. So Laura, what else do we have coming up?
I know, I feel 2024 is just the word election. We've got elections here in the UK, over with you in the US, in India, Mexico, South Africa, the EU, and dozens more. So whatever the results are, though, the impact on global energy policy will be huge. So we wanted to use today, this episode, to look ahead at the year that awaits us and explore what the world needs to keep us on track for net zero. So important.
We're going to be making some predictions. We're going to be making 3 predictions for the year. We're going to be looking at, we're going to be looking at the energy transition, what we sort of see happening, and there's a lot that's happening in the energy transition space. We'll also be looking at the big pledges that came out of COP28, the tripling of renewable energy, the first of its kind loss and damage fund, doubling on energy efficiency, and a lot more. And I think it's also really important, right, that COP28 was in the UAE, hosted in Dubai. Laura, you were there, so I definitely want to hear about what you experienced on the ground. And COP29 is going to be in Azerbaijan, in Baku, and I think it's really, just first out of the gate, really interesting that as of right now, the committee that they've put together is all men, right? Only men are on the COP29 committee, which of course is getting a tremendous amount of criticism. I think it is great, though, that we saw more representation of women at COP28, and I'm hoping that in the upcoming months that there's a kind of a recalibration across the leadership in Azerbaijan to have more female representation, a greater diversity of representation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something, year on year, as the COPs grow as well, it makes space for more people, for more diverse voices. And actually, I think we get the best out of these conferences. It really is. Diversity means we get to hear the best solutions from all over the world, and we get to steal those ideas. It's great to be able to share that and say, actually, as a global effort, we need to be doing this. But, as you've said, there's so many things, pledges, targets that came out of COP28, and some of it was really great, but it does leave you thinking, now that we've got these big targets, what happens this year? What are some of our predictions? These are things that we are maybe not that confident with. I'm going to take a stab in the dark, and hopefully next year we aren't totally wrong. But certainly something for me that is an absolute prediction for 2024 is seeing a big investment in offshore wind. I think it's going to exponentially increase here in the UK, here over with you in the US as well. And, it's a sector that it's not had the best time recently, but I think that things are really going to change. And they kind of have to as well. So over in the UK, we have a massive goal to get 50 gigawatts of offshore capacity by 2030. 2030, that's really not that far away. Currently we only have around just under 14 gigawatts. So we've got a lot to do. But actually, there are many projects in the pipeline. It's estimated that about 77 gigawatts across 80 projects is already in the pipeline, which is fantastic news. But we know that it takes a long time. So we really need to be moving quite quickly with this. I'm in Dundee, and literally just down the road, we've got 90-meter tall pieces of wind turbines all getting built and put together and constructed for an offshore wind farm that's going to be off the coast of Fife. And that is going to be operational this year. It's going to be fantastic. But the site was selected in 2008. And it just makes you take a sit back and go, wow, it's exciting that it's coming, but it's a long time coming to get that. But I do feel like one of the big predictions for this year is just seeing offshore wind take off. I don't know, is that something that you feel over in the States is something that is also going to be relevant?
It's a great question. So I think in the United States, I think we've seen, massive solar deployment. We've seen a lot of pledges to install offshore wind. I think offshore wind is encountering some headwinds in the United States. Some of that is due to supply chain constraints. Some of that is due to kind of on the ground politics and dynamics. However, I think you're also sort of seeing a recognition by governments, state governments, local governments that if they want to meet their targets, that they're going to also have to sort of help in this make up for some of the difference. So I think the politics really matters. I mean, here in the United States, I think that's kind of like a big thing for 2024 is given that we've seen such attention through the Inflation Reduction Act, which was, again, the largest climate legislation in U.S. history, over 390 billion, some estimates 1 trillion in total that will that is going directed towards the clean energy transition. I think we have a kind of a reckoning that we need to do a lot of permitting reform. We need to sort of streamline processes. So, I'm hoping that in 2024, it's like we know what we have to do. We also are seeing, this is like the first year. 2023 was the first year where we saw more investment in clean energy than in fossil fuels. That's very significant, and it's expected to continue to go up. So, what does that displacement look like? And again, I think, going back to COP28, which we talked about earlier, when we think about the $30 billion that the United Arab Emirates committed to a climate fund, to the commitment of a loss and damage fund, right? What is that going to translate into when we look at adaptation? What is it going to look like in terms of climate technologies moving into the most vulnerable areas, the most vulnerable countries to climate change? So. Yeah, there's a lot. There's going to be no shortage, Laura, of things for us to talk about. So we're just going to have to sort of make sure that we restrain ourselves because the topics are many.
Yeah. So that's a prediction, kind of wind, renewable. What other things are you expecting to see in 2024?
Yeah, so I'm expecting to see what I think is really, I think, critical that we are already seeing in 2024 is that it's not if the energy transition is going to happen. The energy transition is very much happening. This is not just about governments making pledges. This is about companies see the opportunities. They recognize that this is the present and it's the future. So we're seeing it across the board. We're seeing it in utilities. We're seeing it in companies in terms of how they're thinking about their carbon emissions. We're seeing so much change happening. That's why I love the fact that this is the Clean Energy Revolution show. This is something that we see this as a revolution that's not just sort of changing the energy landscape, but it's really sort of changing the political landscape. It's sort of changing what gets talked about. You talked about elections in 2024. I mean, climate is going to be a very big part of campaigns. energy is really has kind of catapulted to a top priority area for people around the world. So it's yeah, I'm excited. I look forward to sort of seeing, but I think that it's going to be a year where we continue to see high levels of investment. We'll see some hurdles, but I think that the road is generally a good one looking forward.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think in the same breath as saying there's going to be lots of investment, there's also going to be some tough hurdles to overcome. Another prediction, my sort of final prediction that I was thinking about 2024, the words that spring to mind, we've got elections. I've thrown in wind, we've got investment. One of the words, though, to me that just keeps coming back again and again, here in the UK especially, is retrofit. And when we think about net zero, we just need to think about retrofitting. We have some really old infrastructure that is just not up to the standard of energy efficiency. So when we talk about generating amazing new green, clean electricity or energy, we also need to not waste it. We need it to not be, escaping through the walls and through the windows, through drafty doors. And so I think there's going to be a big push here in the UK to get our infrastructure up to standard. There's about 12.5% of homes that don't even have double glazing. About 50% of homes don't even have insulation. And we've got 3/4 of homes still using gas central heating. So we've really got this mountain to climb when it comes to getting our infrastructure. And, so I'm sitting in my flat, which is a tenement flat. So it's a block of about, 8 flats, 8 apartments. And it's old, it's over 100 years old. It can't really get insulated that well, that easily. I've got double glazing, that's a good start. But actually, you feel the heat escaping. And I've got a gas boiler, and so do most people. So the actual infrastructure itself is a bit of a nightmare. It's very leaky. But then when you add on the complexity of, so I'm physically in a building with 8 apartments, that's 8 different owners. That's potentially some people living where they own or people renting. It's an absolute nightmare just to get the stairs swept, let alone, do some big infrastructure projects. So I really think that's something that's going to be a 2024 hurdle, is actually looking at the infrastructure and saying, how do we change that? And it, goes for other things as well. Stuff like electric car charging infrastructure. We can't keep just building new places. We'll need to be looking at really clever innovations to say, if we are going to be moving to net zero and getting people away from petrol and diesel cars, especially now that low emission zones are becoming a lot more common here in the UK, people need to be able to charge their car. Another great thing about being in a tenement flat, I don't have a driveway, so I couldn't put in a charger even if I wanted to. So I think we're going to see a lot of, particularly, councils, municipalities saying, let's get creative with how we can put in some of these charging things. We've got Electric Avenue in London, where they're putting it into lampposts. We've got BT, which is a sort of broadband internet provider, with a lot of old green boxes on the pavements, the sidewalks for you Americans, saying, we could put some of this infrastructure in alongside what we're already doing. And so I think it's, really trying to think about that, for all this old infrastructure and for all these old cities that we have, how do we bring the clean energy revolution into a place that is old and definitely not up to speed?
That's excellent. Yeah, no, there's so much on the infrastructure front. And I'm going to throw out one more thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and hopefully maybe we can cover it in one of the upcoming episodes, is so much new conversation about artificial intelligence, right? AI. And so I also think that 2024, one of the big topics for discussion, debate, how companies are thinking about using AI, also in thinking about climate modeling. However, just to kind of throw in that other side, I think the other side that is starting to get attention is kind of understanding data centers as being very energy intensive. So sustainability around data centers. So I think we oftentimes take for granted that, the cloud and all these things. We're in chat GBT, right? I'm here at a university and faculty are like, what are we going to do about chat GBT? It's here, right? It's not a matter of will students use it or will, it's like how they're going to use it and how we think about it. But I think there's the other side of data centers that's really, really important is the electricity, the power, and the water. So I think that is a really critical point of discussion as we sort of think about the clean energy revolution. Because if you're Microsoft, if you're Google, if you're Amazon, you're any big company that has sort of lots of data and lots of demand for operational data, and the cartwheels, the jumping jacks sort of going to be done using generative AI. We're going to absolutely need to be really thinking. So I think that's going to be kind of an underappreciated risk, but an opportunity in the clean energy space is how data centers, which are very energy intensive, sort of how they think about their operations.
Yeah, I feel we all ditched paper in the office thinking it was going to be sustainable. And now we've got this, whole new world of, actually putting stuff in a folder online doesn't necessarily have no carbon footprint. And sometimes it's hidden. It's something that's kind of been unveiled. So absolutely, prioritizing where our energy is used is going to be absolutely vital. And that's why these efficiency measures are going to be so important, because we don't just need to keep generating endless amounts of energy. We need to be looking and saying, where can we save it and where can we direct it? Okay, some big predictions for 2024, but we were not the only ones to make some predictions. Out at COP28 in Dubai, National Grid had some delegates who have made some predictions as well. And so I thought we could have a listen and see if we agree, disagree. So here we go. Let's play the first one.
My name is Reihaneh Irani-Famili, and I am working for National Grid as Vice President of Capital Delivery. My predictions for energy and climate in 2024 are that we're going to continue the dialogue that we have been having. We had a shift towards deployment, and that shift is going to continue. We'll see a lot more collaboration than we have had, and we will deploy a lot more renewables than we have had in the past. And we hopefully will change the paradigm on the regulatory regime, looking at what is needed rather than what is now, the system that is now, that was designed for a very different purpose and not to achieve the energy transition. So I have been here now for a few days, and the pledges that I would like to see from COP28 are more financing for the Global South and a real focus on what they need to do for adaptation, as well as a commitment to the 1.5 degrees C target. It's going to be critical to keep the momentum on the path that we're on. My key takeaways of the COP28 so far is that globally we're all driving to the same need of mitigating the impacts of climate while building a resilient system that is affordable and just across the world. And to do that, we need to think about energy access for the Global South primarily, and where that access comes from. We need to think about adaptation as a whole. So resiliency would be more of a global north or other forms of adaptation that is required in other parts of the world. And we also need to think about financing and the challenges of financing in different parts of the world, which then translates into an increased need for workforce and for supply chains, and how we can solve those together in collaboration, because these issues are repeated in every conversation that I've been a part of. These are all common global issues, and we cannot solve them individually. However, some of the solutions will become a lot more local. So it's looking at it broadly and then boiling it down to what works locally in each of our jurisdictions.
Okay, good start. Reihaneh has the same as us, thinking about renewable energy. So that is obviously a huge thing. And at COP28, it was in the first few days that this announcement came. You know, it was an amazing advancement of these negotiations. So absolutely brilliant. But I agree wholeheartedly about collaboration. No one company is going to do the clean energy revolution or get us to net zero. No one initiative is going to get us there. So collaboration is key. And I think we are at a point where companies are ready. You know, there's an appetite. And I particularly think that when you speak to people who are in the traditional energy industry, especially young people, you know, people who have kind of recently graduated university and maybe moved into that sort of engineering field or geology field, or, you know, kind of skilled workers who maybe work on oil and gas, oil rigs, whatever it may be, there is an appetite for them to move over to use their skills. And so I think, yeah, the time is ripe for that. So I'm glad we're on the same track. What does collaboration, yeah, what does it mean for you? Is that something you think is really vital?
Oh, 100%. I really appreciated what she said and her attention one to collaboration, because I think COP28 was a perfect example, right? You had, really sort of strong turnout from the private sector, from corporates. You had, of course, massive, 196 governments, right, who were represented. And then, of course, you have civil society. So it very much is about all the stakeholders that are involved. So that collaboration, I thought that she really addressed that. And the focus on deployment, right? Because we kind of now know what we have to do. And we saw that, 2023 was a record year for deployment of renewable energy. And we're going to need every year to be a record year for deployment. And I also really appreciate her focus on equity and justice, like the just transition. And I think that's something that we kind of constantly have to be sort of coming back to kind of address the affordability and access question. But yeah, I thought it was I appreciated her sort of attention to kind of the all of the above, the collaboration, the deployment, justice, all really important.
Okay, so number one, wholeheartedly agree from us, but what about this one? Here's the next one.
I'm Rhian Kelly. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for National Grid. We're in Dubai for COP28. So my predictions in 2024 for energy and climate change, I think it's going to be an interesting year because we have general elections in both the UK and the US, and they're two areas that we operate in. I think that's probably going to mean that energy and climate change are part of those election campaigns, and particularly a focus on energy security and how much the transition is going to cost. If that's an external perspective, then the internal perspective for National Grid is a really positive one, because we just have a lot to do. We have a lot of growth, we have a lot of building we need to do of new grids, both onshore and offshore in the UK and the US. So it's going to be a really busy year for us. So in terms of the pledges and agreements that we're hoping to see at COP28, I think frankly it's the same as everybody else is hoping for here: a tripling of renewable energy capacity by 2030, a doubling of energy efficiency by 2030, and also key, I think, to all of this is phasing out fossil fuels, or the language to get in the final agreement of phasing out fossil fuels. In terms of my key takeaways so far from COP28, I think there's three. One is this is really a moment of hope. There's about 100,000 people gathered here trying to play their part in solving the crisis of the planet and climate change. After a couple of terrible years with global news and wars, I sort of feel really hopeful about what people are here to do. The second one is really around renewable energy and the growth of renewable energy. And then looking at it from a very National Grid perspective, the role that grids can play in enabling that renewable energy and frankly enabling the decarbonisation of the wider economy. And then probably the final thing from COP28, it's not my first COP, but it always comes through, is the diversity of voices and the need to make this a transition that works for people, that everybody feels that they have a part of it, that they can benefit from it, that it's an opportunity, and that nobody gets left behind. And you get a real sense of that when you are sitting on panels and people are talking about what green jobs and skills mean to them in Colombia, what green jobs and skills mean to them here in the Middle East, and also what it means to us in the UK and the US.
And I have to say, because this is like a topic that I'm so interested in, and I know we'll be talking about it in this season, is the grids, right? Because, even sort of thinking about, when we think about deployment, we have to be constantly thinking about grids, because I can say here in the United States, we need to be expanding the grid in order to sort of, meet the new demands that are coming when we're thinking about electrification. So I was like, when I listened to her, I was 100% sort of nodding my head, yes, yes, yes. And again, really appreciated the emphasis on grids, on the focus on permitting reform. Again, sort of going back to 2024 elections, kind of knowing where we need to make some changes in order to streamline the process and to, again, match what's out there, match the commitments with the deployment, but also making sure that we have the grid capacity and that we're building, we're continuing to build out new transmission. So she got a big A+ from me for what she was paying attention to. And again, I just appreciated kind of a very pragmatic optimism that she had in her sort of thoughts from COP28.
Yeah, very solutions focused. And I think that's absolutely what we need. But I mean, if I can even just throw out a worry though, and I think this is something big, for 2024, all of these elections, one of the biggest political footballs globally is environmental issues, right? And I think it's something that we might see this year, kind of big, whether it's for energy policy or green infrastructure, green jobs, issues even just down to locally what's happening in your local area. There is a big risk that all of these things become political footballs instead of what really we should be saying is the science is clear. We all need to act across the political spectrum, and here's some really great opportunities. But, I did like her optimism, her solutions based approach, really looking at here's what we need to do and almost that hopeful, we do have the solutions. We know what we need to do. We just need to make sure that we're, putting it in place and doing it at the scale that we need as well, not kind of shying away from how big this is going to be, the challenge, but actually, that we're up for it, which I think is great. And, having that tripling of renewable energy and doubling energy capacity coming out of COP28 is the best launch pad that we could have hoped for globally. So yeah, A++, but definitely with we really need to be looking at how all of this is messaged, especially in the campaigning that is going to be happening this year.
So one of the key pledges coming out of COP so far is tripling renewable energy by 2030 and doubling energy efficiency. These are really seminal and we need them to make the transition. In 2024, speaking for the UK and the US, which is our key markets, I think that needs to be the year when we put in place the enablers to hit that target. 2030 is not as far away as it used to be. We've got to work really, really fast to hit that target. We would like to see a commitment to phasing out unabated fossil fuels. At the end of the day, that is where we need to end up. We all know that. In our business, we've signed up to 1.5-degree targets from SBTi across all our business units. And for our gas utilities in the US, we have a clean energy vision which will completely decarbonize those networks in a sustainable, cost-effective way by 2050, if not before. So my first takeaway from COP this year is just the scale of the event. 80,000 people, 100,000 people. The private sector is fully leaned into this energy transition. It's now a self-sustaining transition. That is super exciting. This is the place to be for global business.
So that was Ben Wilson, Chief Strategy and Regulation Officer for National Grid. I think this idea that the transition we're on it, that this is, we need to be sustaining it and, moving it forward. So, and also to your, Laura, to your earlier point, I think that's really important, which I think we're playing a role here is like, how do we communicate? I think we need to be able to better communicate what the energy transition means. And so because this, again, is such a pivotal year, I think that kind of communication is critical so that it doesn't become, political football, right? It doesn't become, instrumentalized in a way that sort of that puts obstacles ahead of the transition that's underway.
Yeah, and something that I like that's been mentioned by a few of these predictions is when we talk about whether it's the tripling of renewable energy or growing the grids, we aren't shying away from also saying, though, fossil fuels have to go. We need to be transitioning those away, because I think sometimes what can happen is we focus on the great new technology that's, down the road. We, focus too much on how much renewable energy we can make, but we don't talk about the other side of the coin, which is what needs to be moved away from. And, it's good to hear that at COP28 and COP27, we had that language slowly coming in. And I think that's always just something to make sure that we remember, to always be thinking about what also we are moving away from at the same time as moving towards.
My name is Sandy Grace. I'm the Vice President of U.S. Policy and Regulatory Strategy for National Grid. My predictions for energy and climate in 2024 is that we're going to have a renewed commitment to focusing on an energy transition that's just and equitable, which means that it's affordable and it's clean and it provides access and benefits to all. I'm hoping to see pledges and commitments coming out of COP28 that have a renewed commitment to what a just and equitable transition looks like. An energy transition that takes into consideration affordability, optimization of existing assets, and leveraging all the best talent and diversity of stakeholders and input from all across the different sectors that need to be involved in the solution of the greatest challenge of our time. Some of the key takeaways that I've derived from COP28 thus far is that climate solutions are not a zero-sum game. What we need is collaboration amongst all of our critical stakeholders to achieve a solution that's just and equitable. I think that some of the key things that I've also heard a lot about is that this is a time of momentous challenge as well as opportunity on a global and a local sense. So the solutions we need are not only macro in nature, but micro as well.
I love that there is always that thought about people and justice, equity, accessibility, affordability, because that really is why we're doing all of this. It's about people and it's about living standards. So yeah, absolutely love that was brought in. And quite like the diversity of all the different predictions and thoughts and takeaways from COP28 and these different National Grid delegates.
Yeah, I loved it as well. And again, all of them sort of brought the pragmatism, but also the sense of kind of hope that so much action, and coming from National Grid where there's so much action that's happening. It was great. I did want to add at one point, because this has stuck with me. Last summer, I worked with some high school students, and they were looking at the energy transition, and one of them, when I asked, why are you spending the summer? It was a 6-week program. Why are you spending the summer doing this? And his answer was that he wants to live in a city that has clean air. He wants to be we have massive energy justice issues here in New York City. And, he said, like, my neighborhood, the air quality is worse than in other places. And he wanted to, he, as a high schooler, is kind of committing. He's planning to kind of take that route because he really wants to be involved. So that really stayed with me also in terms of what I do, why I do what I do, and kind of understanding that this has so many implications for all of us.
Yeah, what a powerful story. And I think when we talk about COP28, 100,000 people going to Dubai to talk about big, massive change that's needed and targets, I think it is, really important to keep that person, to keep that young high school student that's looking at their local area and thinking, I want to make a difference. Like, that's, very powerful, very powerful. Carolyn, it's been so great to do this episode with you, and I cannot wait for the rest of the season.
Well, Laura, thank you so much. It's been fantastic to do this with you. We want to extend our thanks to our listeners for joining us, and look forward to being back. So definitely make sure you tune in for episode 2.